George Spanky McFarland's adult life was drastically different from the lovable youth he was on our group. Spanky remained a dark cloud throughout his later years, no matter how hard he tried to shake it. Spanky had become an advantage and a disadvantage by the time he was in his 30s and 40s. On the one hand, it solidified his place in history. Conversely, it practically forced everyone to perceive him as nothing more than the plump-cheeked gang boss. Near Fort Worth in Texas, throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Spanky made his home in Grapevine. There he attempted to live a more normal life, although his connections to Hollywood were never truly severed. He worked as a pitchman for Justin Boot Company and became a local celebrity, someone who was recognized at the grocery store. Even though he was famous, Spanky was friendly. Whenever somebody wanted to communicate, he would answer his own phone and engage in conversation. On occasion, he would even make an appearance or interview. However, there were some serious moments. When Spanky thought that someone was profiting off of his fame, he would not hesitate to bring a lawsuit. His legal team would not rest until they had taken on businesses, bars, and prohibitions. One well-known instance is his lawsuit against our gang and the band Spanky, which he believed was capitalizing on his persona. It seemed to him that it didn't matter if it was an homage or not. He was prepared to struggle for the respect due to his name. For some, this was Spanky's unexpected side. This once fun-loving American boy may now be seen as a man who was serious and unflappable. A person who was still struggling with the meaning of spanking lay beneath the lawsuits and no-nonsense attitude. Hollywood just couldn't see me as anything other than Spanky, he confessed once. Totally uselessly, it didn't open any doors. Both his initial dissatisfaction and his subsequent embrace of his famous role were genuine. How profound an impression he had on people was evident even in his interactions with other celebrities. Michael Jackson and Spanky met in Texas in 1984 while the singer was on his Thriller tour. An inspiration, according to Jackson, who wore a button with Spanky's likeness. Think about it. Spanky was the one who inspired one of the world's most famous performers to pursue a career in show business. It was as if Spanky was both flattered and perplexed. He said that he had never considered the impact of their music videos on the rock and roll industry. Being famous, though, isn't necessarily enough to keep a job going. There were many highs and lows throughout Spanky's adult life. Aside from flying for the military, he worked as a chauffeur, delivered soft drinks, and sold kitchen appliances. These parts didn't pay the bills, but they were better than his glamorous Hollywood days. A low-budget science fiction western named The Aurora Encounter was his acting return to the big screen, and he later became a TV host in Oklahoma. The film was a short comeback, but it failed to leave an impression. Spanky had fully accepted his life as a businessman in Texas by that point, but he still couldn't suppress his inner performer. Once a gammon, always a gammon was his go-to joke while reminiscing about his days in Hollywood. Fans eagerly lined up to meet the real-life Spanky when he started appearing regularly at community gatherings. Although he could be a bit grouchy at times, he was still our gangster-turned-wise guy, just with more wrinkles and a more biting sense of humor. So, how exactly did George McFarland transform into Spanky? His adventure began in Dallas, Texas, lengthy before his arrival on a Hollywood set. George McFarland was born to Virginia Winifred and Robert Emmett on October 2, 1928. His parents couldn't help but flaunt off their gorgeous baby, so they nicknamed him Sonny. At the tender age of 3, George started posing for children's apparel ads in the local department stores. Though uncomplicated at first, it laid the groundwork for subsequent events. Advertisements for ice cream and breakfast cereals began featuring him in newspapers and on billboards shortly after he became famous. Hal Roach, the producer of our gang, got George's big break when his aunt brought him a clip of him in a Wonder Bread commercial. Roach, who was continuously seeking new talent, noticed something exceptional in the innocent little boy from Texas. He extended an invitation to George to attend a screen test in Los Angeles, where the latter stunned onlookers with an impromptu rendition of a nursery rhyme. In 1931, George was rechristened Spanky after Roach signed him. George was thrust into a world that few youngsters could fathom when he was just 3 years old. The Little Rascals, formerly known as Our Gang, were more than just a TV show, they were a cultural phenomenon. The show's breakout character, Spanky, was a misfit whose antics on stage won over viewers nationwide. However, Our Gang is Spanky's story in and of itself. Brimming with joy, obstacles, and formative experiences that would influence the rest of his life. How, therefore, did this plump little lad become the public face of a much-loved film series in Hollywood? And how did our gang really function behind the scenes? Out of all the kids in our bunch, Spanky was the most talented. He was the group's center of attention the second he showed up. He played the role of the cranky toddler who grudgingly agreed to participate in the gang's hijinks in his early flicks. However, he swiftly rose to the role of leading man because to his superb comic timing. Spanky had risen to the position of gang leader by 1935 and was frequently seen alongside Carl Alfalfa Switzer. Along with Alfalfa's off-key serenades and Spanky's ambitious schemer antics, they were responsible for some of the most iconic moments in the series. However, things weren't always rosy in the background. Alfalfa and Spanky's feud wasn't limited to the silver screen. It even reached the dads, who would get into fights about their son's bill and screen time. Despite their differences, their collaboration became legendary, establishing Spanky as our gang's public face for many years. Not only did Spanky have a natural talent for humor, but he also studied under some of the industry's top names. Laurel and Hardy were also regulars at Hal Roach Studios, where Spanky would regularly go to watch them work. He imitated Oliver Hardy's irritated gestures and Stan Laurel's double takes with astonishing precision. The way Spanky smirks or rolls his eyes after fooling an adult is a clear indication of their influence. His sense of humor was mature for someone so young. He was well known among our gang for more than just his shorts. With General Spanky, the studio attempted to adapt the series for the big screen in 1936. Although it was Spanky's sole feature film leading role, the plot set during the Civil War fell flat with moviegoers. Some thought it was too nostalgic, thus they didn't like it. And the results at the box office were less than stellar. Even so, the Our Gang series persisted in making short films featuring Spanky far into the late 1930s. As Spanky looked back on his boyhood, working on Our Gang was more than simply a job. During his career, he was in 14 feature films and 95 of the 121 shorts. Although there were other less enjoyable moments. Even while every scenario was meticulously planned, the studio went to great lengths to make the children appear natural and spontaneous on TV. To ensure that the kids' emotions were authentic, directors like Robert McGowan utilized megaphones to direct them and explain the situations just before filming began. The scripts were more of a set of general directions, with a lot of space for creative interpretation. At a period when segregation was rampant in the United States, Our Gang's representation of diversity stood out. The show took a daring step for its time by showing white and black kids playing together. Spanky formed friendships that went beyond the constraints of their time working together with co-stars such as Matthew Beard, Stymie, and Billy Thomas, Buckwheat. Despite backlash over racial jokes, many of the show's original cast members supported it, claiming it was ahead of its time. Although there was genuine camaraderie among the actors, the constant pressure to perform was crushing. As an adolescent, Spanky confessed that he was sick of acting. Being a child star came with its share of challenges, including being the center of attention all the time and working long hours. He took a leave of absence from our crew in 1938 to tour as a public figure, but was rehired when the series was picked up by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. Even with Spanky on board, MGM's take on Our Gang couldn't match the enchantment of the originals. In 1942, when he was 14 years old, he made his last performance on the show. Spanky was Our Gang's public face for more than a decade, and his departure from the series was a watershed moment for both him and Hollywood. The adorable little kid whose expressive face and sharp mind captivated spectators had matured. What transpired subsequent to Spanky bidding farewell to Our Gang, then? How did he manage to live a normal life when his youthful stardom faded? George Spanky McFarland compared leaving our group behind like entering a dark, strange place for the first time. His star power had waned, and he was no longer the naughty child whose antics had captivated fans all over the globe. Rather, he was merely George, an innocent young man seeking his place in a world that refused to recognize him for who he really was, Spanky. As soon as Spanky turned 24 in 1952, he enlisted in the United States Army. The Air Force. In the absence of gazes from onlookers and cheers, he found direction and purpose in taking this step. Upon his return to normal life, though, he rapidly became aware of how severely typecast he had become. He was no longer wanted by Hollywood. Instead of seeing him as a promising young man, the industry viewed him as an artifact from a different time, a symbol of our group. But Spanky was never one to do nothing. Far from the glitz and glamour of his youth, he rolled up his sleeves and worked a string of mundane jobs. He did everything from packing popsicles at a factory to flipping burgers at a stand and working at a soft drink plant. From his days on set, where every detail was carefully considered and executed, each task was completely different. The unpredictable and difficult real world now awaited him. Spanky returned to show business in the mid-1950s, although this time on a somewhat lesser scale. He took over as host of Tulsa, Oklahoma's KOTV's The Spanky Show. For kids, there were live crowds, guest stars, and repeats of the Little Rascal cartoons on this kids program. Spanky may meet up with his longtime admirers for the first time. It appeared, for a time, to be a breath of fresh air, a chance to honor his history while constructing something new. But he was unable to realize his show's potential due to creative disagreements with the station's management. By 1960, he had grown disillusioned and was prepared to leave. Spanky eventually became an expert in everything he touched. He worked as a wine salesman, restaurant and nightclub manager, and occasional furniture and appliance salesman. Notable among his accomplishments was his rise through the ranks to the position of National Sales Training Director at the Philco Ford Corporation. After being Hollywood's beloved for so long, Spanky's unexpected change in fortunes was due to his natural talent for making friends, which he utilized throughout his sales career. Spanky was never truly out of the limelight, even as he did these mundane jobs. Former members of our gang, such as Darla Hood and Billy Buckwheat Thomas, were frequent guests on his talk shows. Memories of their youth flooded these get-togethers, but they also served as a sobering reminder of how far they had all fallen from their stardom. Spanky discovered a way to combine his business savvy with his fondness for nostalgia in the 1980s, but he still treasured these occasions, enjoying his role as the elder statesman of the little. He was able to relate anecdotes from his time in our gang as general manager of the Nostalgia Channel, a classic movie channel. He went on a cross-country speaking tour, entertaining audiences with behind-the-scenes stories. By that point, he had completely embraced his Spanky persona, viewing it as a means of connecting with the millions of fans who liked the mischievous pups. Charity golf tournaments were among Spanky's favorite pastimes at the time. Among his many charitable endeavors was the 16-year-running Marion, Indiana, golf classic that bears his name. Tournaments served as more than only a means of collecting money. In them, Spanky might meet new people, do good deeds, and enjoy being around happy people. College campuses also became popular venues for Spanky's performances, where the class was anxious to hear his tale of life as a gang member from the man himself. Many fans would go into great depth during Quanda sessions, asking questions pertaining to particular episodes or scenes. Even though Spanky didn't recall every detail, he was a child during most of it, he had a talent for making people laugh with his zany anecdotes. What he was doing was making fresh memories for his supporters, not merely reliving. Spanky started to slow down a bit as the years passed, but he never really retired. In subsequent appearances and interviews, he reiterated his devotion to the show that had shaped his formative years. Still, his voyage was winding down, even as he discovered fresh methods to engage with supporters. At a ceremony in April 1993, Spanky was honored and had his handprints put to the Wall of Fame at Chicago's Loews Theater. This was done just a few months before he passed away. It was a moment of validation for someone who had lived in the shadow of his boyhood fame for decades. Something to keep in mind that his impact on Hollywood history was just as permanent as his fingerprints. That same month, in an episode of Cheers called Woody Gets an Election, he made his final television appearance. In a performance that mirrored his graceful acceptance of his legacy, Spanky played himself with a blend of humor and modesty. As things stood, though, Spanky's health was slowly but surely declining. Tragically, it happened on June 30, 1993. In his Keller, Texas, house, Spanky passed out. Doctors at Grapevine's Baylor Medical Center tried to revive him after he passed out, but they were unsuccessful. He was just 64 years old when he died, less than an hour after he arrived. Although a heart attack was listed as the official cause of death, there are rumors that aneurysm could have played a role. It was tragic news for everyone involved, including fans and family. After relocating to Keller with his wife Doris in 1971, Spanky enjoyed a rich life there, from whom he wed in 1955. George Gregory, Betsy, and Vern Emmett were their 3 children. Doris was the rock upon which Spanky's continuing family life rested, notwithstanding his 1949 marriage to Paula Jean Wilkinson. Until his last day on this earth, she was there for him through all of the ups and downs, reinventions, and difficulties. The McFarland family had been plotting a 1993 surprise for him, which was a bittersweet turn of events. Even though Spanky was chosen to have a star placed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, he was unaware of the honor. He had planned for his wife to reveal the surprise by traveling to California for the ceremony. On February 1, 1994, after he had passed away, the star was displayed posthumously at 7095 Hollywood Boulevard. Its placement with the likes of Irving Berlin and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. is evidence of Spanky's enduring influence. There are only two Our Gang stars, and he is one of them. In the company of Jackie Cooper to be honored in this way. Beyond the realm of Hollywood, Spanky left an indelible mark. A dedicated philanthropist, he gave generously to organizations like Cook Children's Medical Center and the Leukemia Society of America. To put his notoriety to good use, he hosted a charity golf tournament in Marion, Indiana, for 16 years. His last bequest remained very meaningful long after he passed away. More than a dozen people benefited from Spanky's generosity as an organ and tissue donor. An emotional farewell to Spanky, a man who had an impact on innumerable lives, was observed at his memorial ceremony on July 3, 1993, at Fort Worth's First United Methodist Church. A last resting place fitting for someone whose life was so firmly anchored in Texas. His ashes were to be interred in Austin's Texas State Cemetery. The life of Spanky is an inspiring tale of perseverance, charisma, and the power of human connection. His impact is felt long after he has passed away. How was it that this young man enchanted so many people? We'll never forget Spanky McFarland because of his infectious laugh, dogged determination, and playful antics.